Hiya, welcome back to my channel. I'm Stacey and this is Vintage Stacey. Today I'm going to do my February reading wrap up, which for me is my Fab 4 February wrap up. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but we got there. So anyone who's been watching my channel will know that through February I kind of set myself the challenge that I was going to try and read all the Beatles books that are on my TBR. I had a few that had sort of stacked up and I wanted to kind of clear them, and I thought let's have a go and see if we can do them in one hit and get them done. I have an earlier video, I'll link it below, that went through my TBR for the month. I had 7 books. I was hoping to get through as many as possible. I didn't think I was managed to get through all 7. As it happens, I'm happy to tick all 7 off my TBR thanks to a technicality. There were 2 that I DNF'd, having started them and not really got on with them. So because of that, I did read, to some extent, all 7 books on the TBR got picked up. 5 of them got finished. If I hadn't had those 2 DNFs, then I wouldn't have got through the list. But because of that, and because I don't, for the time being at least, intend to go back to the 2 that I didn't finish, I'm happy to clear them all off my TBR and consider it done for now. But yeah, so I'll run through the 7 of them and talk about what I thought. If I go from my least favourite through to my most favourite, that's probably the easiest way to do it so that I don't end up on a negative kind of rant towards the end. So yeah, so my least favourite, unfortunately, was Imagine by Lesley-Anne Jones. My hopes weren't incredibly high for this. The premise was good. The idea of this is that it's a thriller. A music journalist is present on the night when John Lennon is murdered. She witnesses the shooting, and then events kind of proceed from there. Sort of years later, when she's had her career, somebody starts to taunt her and kind of pursue her, I suppose. I DNF this, so I don't know where that pursuit goes or where it goes. I struggled with this. It's pasty to start with, although I'm not entirely sure what Lesley-Anne Jones's problem with Yoko Ono is. Again, I mentioned when I reviewed her Christine McVie biography, it was really overtly clear all the way through that she cannot stand Lindsay Buckingham, and she made no secret of that, to the point where it got in the way of her kind of telling the story. And that kind of happened here. Even within the first few pages, you can feel the disdain for Yoko Ono jumping off the page, and it's odd. It's a weird take. Maybe that's incredibly important. Maybe you get to the end and Yoko did it. I don't know. I didn't get there because I couldn't stick with it. It's written in first person present tense, which that's a hard POV to stick with for an entire novel. It's really difficult to write first person present tense without feeling as though you are constantly telling and not showing. So I walked to the door, I opened the door, I stepped through the door, I closed the door behind me, I had a look around to see what was behind the door. I wasn't interested, so I opened the door and went back out again. And you're just like, oh God, it's exhausting. And in the first instances where she's like relaying the shooting, it has quite an immediacy to it, but very quickly that starts to grate. A lot of it's told through dialogue, which works quite well. Actually, her dialogue's fairly snappy. But yeah, I just couldn't get into this. I didn't like it, is the core. I didn't feel comfortable or as though I was enjoying myself while I was reading it, so I kind of DNF'd this fairly swiftly. I think I made about 150 pages in. It just wasn't doing it for me, so unfortunately this was a DNF. The next one I DNF'd was Living with the Beatles. It was the Kenneth Womack's biography of Mal Evans, and I really wanted to love this. I was really looking forward to it. Mal Evans has got this kind of hangdog vibe to him, and you just kind of feel, oh, because he's huge and he always looks so friendly, and I really wanted to hear his story. And the early parts of it, when the book was covering his childhood, I was really engaged with. But what became apparent really quickly was that the author had worked very closely with Mal Evans's family, and I think although it's really important for biographers to work with families and to have like buy-in from the people who know the subject, it's a fine line that they have to walk between getting access to that material but also then being kind of guided to write the narrative they're expected to write. And there are numerous occasions through this where Mal Evans comes across really oddly because there's no real there's no real examination as to why he does what he does, other than he's a nice guy. And that's lovely, but if that is the only reason, then that's a bit dull. Yeah, he just seems to go along with things to kind of keep the peace and to be part of the crew and to be in with the in crowd. And that kind of makes you really annoyed when he's a fully grown man who has a wife and child to support. You know, he's sort of travelling around the world. He's being paid exactly the same. Even when the Beatles are at their height, he barely gets a pay rise from when they start. And he doesn't say anything about this. He just kind of carries on, even though his responsibilities increase and what he's asked to do is increasing. He's not getting any kind of financial reward for that. And he's still struggling to kind of live a lifestyle that keeps up with a Beatles entourage lifestyle. And his wife is back at home while they're off on tour and stuff, or in the studio, or doing whatever they're doing. His wife is at home raising their son on exactly the same wage that he had at the beginning. And you sort of go, well, I'm not even slightly surprised that this doesn't end up being sustainable. I'm also not slightly surprised that he ends up being so lost when the band breaks up. I think, you know, it was a challenging one, and I couldn't get to the end of it because you just wanted to shake him and just sort of go, what's wrong with you? Why would you do this? Yeah, I just didn't. You don't get the impression at any point that he is as important to the Beatles as the Beatles are to him, which I get, that's fine, but it makes a lot of his choices really hard to understand. And I think because of that, because I couldn't relate to the choices he was making through his life, I couldn't go with the story because I was just irritated the whole time. Like I said, the early chapters when they were talking about his childhood and growing up in Liverpool and then going to Wales during the Second World War to avoid the bombings and school life and things like that, that was really charming and I really enjoyed that. But once it got into him being a fully grown man in his late 20s and early 30s, just acting like a teenager following a rock band around, it just wasn't. Yeah. So I didn't finish it, like any of those sentences just then. Yeah, I might come back to this one. I had the audiobook and the ebook for this to see if it helped, but it didn't. So I can revisit it if I want to, and I might with this one. Yeah. So on to the ones that I did finish, and I'm going to run through these again in ascending order to keep it sort of easy. I think the next one up would be Paul is Undead. Paul is Undead, the British zombie invasion. I was really looking forward to this. The Beatles are zombies, and they've realised that being zombies and having adoring teenage fans who follow them and chase them and want to be around them is a really good way for zombies to access fresh brains. Like Jagger's in this. There's everybody who you think would be in a Beatles biography pops up in this, but in zombie or zombie hunting form. It's written in the way anyone who's my sort of age will remember sort of music magazines and pop magazines when they used to interview musicians, and you'd have the question, the interviewer's name, and then the question, and then the famous person's name, and then their answer. It's done like that throughout. And it chops between, so you always know exactly who's speaking because the name is at the beginning of the paragraph, and it's quite easy to rattle through because of that. It keeps it quite light. It keeps it quite light. You rattle through it. It's fun. It's funny. There are some genuinely funny bits in this. As I suspected, this is too much book for the amount of joke, and it does get a little. I was skimming slightly in places to kind of, because you were getting the same thing from different points of view as you would do when you're doing when you're listening to a music documentary or reading an interview in a music magazine. You quite often get different band members' takes on the same thing in order to kind of build the picture, but with this it was a bit much in places. So I did enjoy this. Like I said, I finished it, I had a good time, but it was a little, it's sort of 3 stars. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't reread it. It doesn't need to be reread. Once you get the joke, you get it. But it was fun. Next one up in order of preference for me was the Beatles lyrics. There's a subtitle for this. isn't it? The unseen story behind the music. This is Hunter Davies, who did the official biography, and I was really looking forward to this because Hunter Davies obviously is quite an authority on the Beatles. I recommended his biography when I did my list of books to get started with if you haven't read Beatles books before. So I was looking forward to this one. This one, I admit, I went backwards and forwards on. I didn't read it start to finish. I chopped around, which I think was the wrong way to read this, and I think it would have ranked a little bit higher if I'd read it start to finish. But I got overexcited and I thumbed through 2 particular songs that I wanted to read about and particular albums that I wanted to kind of dive into. I think reading this start to finish would give you the evolution of their songwriting, which I think would add an extra touch to this. But that said, I still really enjoyed this. There are some gorgeous photos in here of lyric sheets with, I don't know if you're going to be able to pick that up on the camera, but with crossing out sort of lines through and extra words put in and changes and things. And I love all of that stuff. Watching how a writer chooses their words and how they change their mind and how something sounds on the ear can change. You go back and go, okay, that word isn't right. That is what I want to say, but that's not the right word to express it, or that's not quite the right rhythm that I want that sentence or that line to have. I love that. So seeing the actual edits on a lyric sheet is just meat and drink for me. Yeah, I can thoroughly recommend this one, and it's definitely one that will stay on my shelf to refer back to, because you can just dip in and look for the specific song. It's kind of, it is organised by chronology. So you can kind of go in and look for the specific song or album that you want to know more about, or you want to reference something if you hear it in a biography or anything. So yeah, really enjoyed that one, can recommend. Next up was The Lost Album of the Beatles. This was by Daniel Rachel, and this posits the question of what if the Beatles hadn't split up when they did, what would their next album have sounded like? And so he goes through, and it is chunked down. Again, this is one that you could dip in and out of, and I did, because he deals with Lennon's songwriting, he deals with McCartney's solo output, he deals with George's solo output. I mean, kind of mentioned Ringo, but I mean, he's in the room, do you know what I mean? And that he talks about everything that was going on at the time, unreleased Beatles cuts and things, and everything that could have gone into this. I kind of want to buy this album, and I think I will probably spend a bit of time putting together, because a lot of this stuff is available in different places, and I think I probably will put some time together putting together a playlist so that I can listen to it in the way that he thinks it would have set listed at the end. Yeah, really enjoyed this one, and again, like the lyric one, this one will definitely stay on my shelf to refer back to, because there's some really nice sections in here where he breaks down the different musical styles and the different choices that are getting made, and you get a real feel for what that album might have sounded like. It's really good. Next one up was The Beatles and Their Historians, Analysis of Writing About the Fab Four. This is by Erin Torkelson Weber. I said that name wrong like 3 times yesterday, so I was going to read it off just save time. Erin Torkelson Weber. Still couldn't get it. I loved this, and if it wasn't for the fact that I love the next one even more, this would have been, I thought, when I read this first off, I thought this was going to be the top of the tops. This is so good. This is like an academic study of how historians write about the Beatles, and the historical accuracy and the historical research quality that goes into writing about the Beatles, or frequently doesn't go into writing about the Beatles. And she pulls apart some of the long enduring myths and legends about the Beatles that are just repeated in book after book after book, with nobody kind of going back to go, hang on, did that actually happen? And she goes through like basic fact checking, like the repetition of John's aunt Mimi used to tell the story that she picked her way through the bombs during an air raid in order to get to see the newborn baby John Lennon, but there was no air raid when he was born. And nobody checked that for years. Nobody checked that. Nobody knows whether Mimi misremembered it. Perhaps she went to visit the baby a few days after, or a week, sometime after he was, but maybe she didn't go on the night he was born. Maybe she was embellishing the story to give it some, whatever it was. But nobody checked for years. The fact that there was a very clear record of every single occasion when Liverpool was bombed. And we know John Lennon's date of birth, but nobody had fact-checked that for years. And that story, and I remember I've read that story in numerous books and numerous documentaries and stuff. I've seen it come up where people would talk about Aunt Mimi dodging through the bombs in order to go and see the new baby. Never happened, didn't happen, and nobody had checked that for ages. But then she also deals with subjective stuff, like John Lennon's first interviews when the band officially split up, and the amount of venom that he directs at everybody, almost everybody. I don't think anybody escapes unscathed through those interviews, and they're a hard listen. You can get the audio, I think it's on YouTube actually, but they're a hard listen. That's a man who is hurting, but he's decided to deal with that by hurting everybody else, and it's not nice. But again, for many years, particularly Rolling Stone and a lot of the serious rock dudes who were writing for music publications, took that interview and those comments that he made then as gospel, and never checked any of it, never revisited any of it, never considered the fact that he was grappling with quite a severe heroin addiction at the time, and that everything was still really raw, and that it wasn't necessarily a balanced account. And she really looks into that, and she breaks through all of the different periods in the Beatles' evolution. She looks at the really carefully stage managed Epstein years, when the messages that were being put out were really carefully controlled. You know, who they were dating was a secret. The fact that John was married was supposed to be a secret. I mean, it's the worst kept secret ever, but it was a secret. And yeah, she really kind of breaks it down, and she gives a good amount of time. I know this is my kind of weak spot, but she gives a good amount of time to George and Ringo, and she acknowledges the fact that quite often through the Beatles' history, George and Ringo are telling everybody the truth, but nobody pays any attention to them. Nobody writes about George and Ringo. Nobody kind of listens to the fact that, actually, hang on, George has just said something really quite insightful about Beatlemania, or about what it's like to be in the band, or about the recording process. Or Ringo's just said something really, what have you, about their home life or their family situation or whatever it is, but nobody was listening. And we only care about what Paul and John say, and we miss so much because we ignore the two other first-hand eyewitness accounts that are more readily available, because both of them just kind of drop things into conversation with journalists, or and just say stuff that nobody really acknowledges. I loved this because it's academic. It reads like a thesis. I don't think it was intended as a thesis originally, but she's an academic, and it's written like an academic paper. It is so well resourced and sourced and cited, and I love this. This is my kind of history writing, and the fact that it's been applied to music biography just makes me so happy, because I can use this to go off on different tangents and find other things and read other stuff and look it up and go back to refer to it. It is beautiful. This is exactly how I want my music biography sort of style writing to be. This is absolute top drawer. Love it. And it would have been my pick for February. It would have been my best read for February if it wasn't for this absolute triumph. This, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that this may well end up being my favourite read of the year, and we're only in February. It's that good. It is better than anything that I read music biography wise last year. So something's going to have to come along and be pretty spectacular to beat this. It's so good. It's so good. I have the ebook and the audiobook, and I was chopping backwards and forwards depending on where I was, because I didn't want to stop reading this. So whenever I was doing something where I couldn't hold on to my Kindle, I had the audiobook on. The audiobook is narrated by Chris Addison, who is perfect for this. The comedian Chris Addison, he does a lot of work on Radio 2. Anyone who watches British TV will be familiar with Chris Addison. He's great, and it works really well. This is divided up by songs chronologically. We move through their relationship from when they first meet as children through to the aftermath of John's death and how Paul processes that. There's sections for Beatlemania, there's sections for Sgt. Pepper. He goes through all of the main touch points that you can imagine, and he picks songs that you would think of for those eras, but also not necessarily, because what he's looking at is the evolution of their relationship, not the evolution of the Beatles or the evolution of the songwriting. He's looking at how different songs reflect how these two men were interacting with each other and processing their feelings for each other. It's so good. It's an examination of male friendship. It's an examination of the way that men communicate with each other. This would have been an entirely different book if you were talking about two women, because how men, particularly in different times and places, but how men communicate with each other quite often it just is different to how women communicate with each other. And this is two men who love each other very, very deeply, but also are competing with each other, are jealous of each other, are frightened of the power that the other one has over them because of the strength of their feelings. It's so fascinatingly looked at. The only thing that was niggling at me about this was the almost absence, they are mentioned, but the almost absence of George and Ringo, which I was like, well, that's me because I've got a soft spot for George and Ringo, but they're almost not there. And then at the end, there is an author's note where he says, I know they're not there. I've done this deliberately because I just want to look at this bubble that the two of them existed in did exclude everybody else. It was hard for everyone else to break in, and anyone apart from Lennon and McCartney was on the outside looking in, even George and Ringo. And the author's note is perfect. It was almost my favourite part of the book, because you were like, oh my gosh, that's exactly, and through the book you're feeling this frustration and this inability to access in through other points of view, and you realise that that's exactly how everybody around them felt at the time. And it made the whole thing even smarter, even better, even more insightful. You were just like, oh my god, that's so clever. Because that could have been an introduction, it could have been a prologue, and I could have read that at the beginning and gone in not expecting to see George and Ringo, not expecting to hear from them particularly. But that's not what happened. What happened was that I did expect access, I did expect more of other people, and when they don't particularly feature very much, or they're just passing references, you sort of get this skim of, oh, that's not fair, what, oh. And then at the end you go, yeah, you did that on purpose, you cheeky monkey. This is so good, genuinely so good. I cannot justify, as a girl on a budget, I can't justify buying the hard copy of this when I have the ebook and the audiobook right now, but I blatantly will. This is going to stay on my shelves. This is a permanent addition to the collection, and this was worth the month's reading project to get to this alone. Cannot recommend enough. I know I'm rambling, but it was so good, so very good. Okay, so there we go. That was my Fab for February. I had a fantastic time. If anybody else read any Beatles books, pop them in the comments below. I have seen people mention some, and I've now got a new TBR kind of percolating in the background, but I'm going to take a break. I'm a bit Beatled out, I will not lie, after 4 weeks or so of solid Beatles books. It was a lot. I don't know what I'm going to read next. I don't have any reading plans for March. Things are a bit weird at the moment. Again, I'll tell you about that another time. I don't know what I'm going to get to, but it's probably not going to involve anybody with a Liverpool accent. Just saying. Anyway, I hope everyone's alright. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Bye.